What's up, everybody? Welcome to Sports Earth. In this video, I am going to be talking about the top running backs in the NFL draft, but I'm not going to be solely focusing on their games. This video is, of course, it's going to focus on their games, some, and their type of play styles, but it's going to focus more on the state of the running back position in the NFL, and we've seen this with contracts. Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, they're some of the top running backs in the NFL that have gotten paid, and, contracts just maybe aren't what you see from some of the other skill positions on offense, and the running back position is just super undervalued, and I'm going to be talking about it in this video, and I'm going to be sort of talking about the top draft prospects at the position, and I'm just going to sort of be going over some different aspects of the running back position here in 2021, in the game styles, and you'll see this once we get to the game styles of each running back. They're really beginning to change. So, we're going to get right in this thing. So, the first page is just, we're going to be going over all the different running backs. So, the first guy, and these are my top 8 running backs that we will be looking at. So, number 1, Travis Etienne from Clemson. So Etienne, I think, is a fringe first-round pick. He could go in the first round, could go in the second round. Sounds like the Buffalo Bills may be interested in selecting him in the first round sometime. So Buffalo, a team to watch for Etienne. But there are some other teams that are fits. But it sounds like Buffalo could be interested in even trading up from their number 29 spot to select Etienne. And he is a very complete back. He can run out of the backfield, of course, and he can catch passes out of the backfield. And he's a pretty solid pass blocker. Now, he's a little inconsistent in the pass blocking game, and that's a fairly common theme that you will see. So, Etienne, he's probably the most complete back in this class. It's mainly the reason why I have him at number 1 overall on my running backs board. So, Etienne is my number 1. At number 2, I have Naji Harris, running back from Alabama. He's another guy that's like fringe first round. Right now, I'd say he probably has a better chance to go in the first round than Etienne does. There are more teams towards the running back range that I will be talking about later. But there are more teams in that sort of range where these guys could go that would be more willing to take Harris over Etienne. You look at the Steelers, potentially the Dolphins even. And in the second round, these guys could go very early second round as well. In the third slot, Naji Harris, he is a very complete back as well. In the third slot, I have Michael Carter as the first North Carolina running back. The reason that this one is probably surprising you, typically Javonte Williams is the first North Carolina running back, and Javonte Williams typically the third running back that you see, but I do have Michael Carter ahead of him. So Michael Carter, he's a guy that could go second round, could go third round. Personally, I see him as a second round pick, but that might be a little generous, and I'll tell you why a little bit later in this video. But Michael Carter, another guy who's a very complete game. He's got a solid game in between the tackles. He has great speed on the outside, and he's an amazing guy coming out of the backfield. At number 4, I have Javonte Williams, another running back from North Carolina. So he's a guy that I think could sneak into the first round, potentially over Etienne. Probably not over Harris, just because they're sort of similar play styles. But even though all 4 of these guys are listed as complete backs, there are 2 that are much different from the other 2. And I'll talk about that once we get through all 8 prospects. But Javonte Williams, he's a guy that it would not shock me if he finds his way into the first round. And he's a very complete back as well. So once again, I'll talk more about that at the towards the end of the video. At number 5, I have Kenneth Gainwell from Memphis. Kenneth Gainwell is a guy that I see going probably early to mid third round. I don't really think he goes much higher than that, but I don't see him lasting until day 3. And he's more of a receiving back. Of course, he has a great run game. But for the purposes of this video, I'm labeling him as a receiving back with the ability, of course, to run in between the tackles. Just is not super strong, and he's got a little bit of a smaller frame, so of course that's not easy, and pass blocking isn't super easy either. At number 6, I have Jamar Jefferson, a running back from Oregon State, and Jefferson, he's a guy that's going to get drafted pretty low. I think he goes somewhere in the 5th or 6th rounds, but he's a pretty complete running back. Overall, he's got a pretty complete game. He's able to run in between the tackles, amazing out of the backfield, and he's a pretty solid blocker as well. At number 7, I have Ramondre Stevenson from Oklahoma, so he probably goes 4th round. I don't really see him sliding into the 5th, but I did throw him on there as 5th round as well. But he's probably a 4th round pick. He's a power back. He's really big, by far the biggest guy that you'll see on this list. And he's just going to run through people. That's his strength. And he's a pretty solid blocker as well, but of course, just power runs are his big thing. And at number 8, I have Trey Sermon, a running back from Ohio State. So Trey Sermon, he's similar in some ways to Ramondre Stevenson, just in the fact that he doesn't offer a whole lot in the receiving game. So Trey Sermon, I think that he is a solid player for sure, but I don't love his game in the receiving aspect. He and Stevenson, probably the 2 worst receivers on this list, and they are number 7 and number 8 overall. So Stevenson, Sermon down there, they're more like running backs. They don't really offer a whole lot in the receiving game, but I do think Sermon is probably a 4th round pick, probably early 4th round as well. But I could see him sliding down a little bit. Just depends on what happens on days 1 and 2. But Trey Sermon doesn't offer a lot in the receiving game, and he's not amazing in pass block either. So I'd say he's more of an early down back where you're going to be running more. But now to the main focus of this video. So on this list, you see 5 guys labeled as complete backs. You see 1 listed as a receiving back, 1 as a power back, and 1 as an early down back. So just to clarify, of course, a complete back, that's a guy that can do sort of everything pretty well. You see that, of course, with a lot of those top guys. Etienne, Harris, Carter, and Williams are all listed as complete backs. And then Jamar Jefferson over at number 6 as well. A receiving back, that's a guy that, running, it's still his job, of course, but he offers, I'd say, the best value in the receiving game. Power back for Ramondre Stevenson, that should be pretty self-explanatory. Ramondre Stevenson, he's a bulldozer right up the gut, and he's pretty solid pass protection, but of course not great in the receiving game. That's to be expected. And early down back, similar to Ramondre Stevenson, but a little bit different just because of the skill set. Trey Sermon, much more dynamic, so I didn't want to call him a power back, but he's a guy that's not going to be in there for a bunch of passing downs, similar to Stevenson. So the running back game is really changing. Say 20 years ago, you probably don't have all these guys who are these amazing receivers and amazing pass blockers, because the NFL, it's transitioning, and Derrick Henry is a great exception to this. So you just have to remember when I'm talking about this that there are occasionally going to be guys that don't necessarily follow this idea. You see Ramondre Stevenson, the big guy in this draft class, but Derrick Henry is the superstar in the NFL, arguably the best running back in the league, but he's sort of an exception to this standard, and I guess Trey Sermon kind of fits into this as well, just with the fact that he doesn't offer a lot in the receiving game. The NFL and college football as well, they're both turning into leagues that you see a lot more passing in, quarterbacks gaining value just because offenses are changing. A lot of offenses, you're going to see a lot of passes thrown. So running backs, they don't just run the ball. They have to be able to catch to have a super high value. That's why guys like Etienne and Harris are all the way up at the top. And that's part of the reason why I have Javonte Williams lower. He doesn't offer quite as much in the receiving game as some of the guys above him, but receiving has become such a big part of a running back's game, and the game is just really changing. Of course, you still see occasionally, like Stevenson, like Henry, you still see those guys that are big power runners, and Javonte Williams, I feel like he's a more skilled Ramondre Stevenson, just in the fact that he's big, but he offers a lot more in the receiving game, and he's way more elusive as well, so he's basically a better, more skilled Ramondre Stevenson, but that same sort of idea that he's a bigger, in between the tackles back, but Williams and Harris, I think they're 2 guys that, especially Williams, I'd say Harris, pretty safe to call him a complete back, but I think Williams, he's fringe, maybe early down, and he had to split carries and split touches with Michael Carter in North Carolina, So maybe some of this has to do with splitting touches, but I feel like he doesn't really offer an amazing receiving game. Now, that could change in the NFL if he becomes a featured back and doesn't have to split carries with another superstar like Michael Carter. But Javonte Williams, he doesn't offer a whole lot, but he does offer more in the receiving game than a guy like Ramondre Stevenson. But you have to be able to catch to be up here and be one of those top guys, and you have to be able to make plays out of the backfield. You got to be super elusive. Derrick Henry, even at his monstrous size, and this kind of goes for Naji Harris, he sort of has that same theme to him, and he's just a very strong runner, but he has breakaway speed. Now, it's not top-end speed like you see with ETN or some of these other guys, but they have breakaway speed, and they're strong, and they can catch out of the backfield, they can pass block. So Naji Harris, I think he's a great example of that. ETN, he really does everything well. He's got pretty ideal size, and he's quick, but he can run in between the tackles as well. Certainly not his strength, I wouldn't say, just because he isn't one of those bigger body guys. But ETN, he's pretty much your modern-day running back. He can run all over the field, and he can make plays out of the backfield. Really proved that this past season at Clemson. And he can pass block as well, because with more passing plays, a receiver isn't going to be going out on every single play to run a route. So occasionally they are going to have to stay back and pass block. And that's a very important thing. And ETN, he's still developing that area. That's probably the weakest area of his game, but that's something that he's still developing. It's going to get better with time and with experience. So Travis Etienne, the most complete back in this draft class. But that's just sort of a main theme that I really wanted to focus on in this video. Just sort of the idea that running backs aren't just running backs anymore. But at the same time, even with their expanded value in offenses, they're losing value to the teams. You hear this a lot, just people talking about the decreasing value of running backs around the NFL. People are scared to give them contracts, and this goes for a couple of different reasons. A, with them touching the ball so much, they get hit a lot, and injuries are unfortunately a common theme in running backs. Just because they take a lot of hits, they take so much contact because they have the ball in their hands so much. That's definitely a concern with running backs. A lot of these guys aren't really the same guy once they hit 30, 31 years old. We've seen Adrian Peterson take a sharp decline the past couple seasons in his play. Of course, he's still a solid running back in the NFL, but, in the past few years, he just doesn't have that same burst of speed, and that's expected with age. But Adrian Peterson is a solid example, and unfortunately, running backs, they're sort of a risk to pay. We've seen that not pay off with a guy like Todd Gurley. You could use Christian McCaffrey as a short-term example. In his first season under his big 4-year, $64 million extension, he missed most of the season with an injury, but that's only year one, so definitely not time for Panthers and their fans to panic. But injuries are a common theme in running backs just because of the amount of hits that they take, the amount of touches that they have. So teams are really scared to pay them. But also, you hear a lot of people talking about when they're ranking guys overall, running backs typically are a little bit lower just because of that concern. They don't really have the longevity of some other guys, especially quarterbacks. Behind a good offensive line, those are typically guys that last for a long time. Look at Tom Brady, Drew Brees. But running backs, they're maybe a little bit lower on boards than they deserve. And I think that goes for my own board as well. So I have Travis Etienne, of course, as my top running back. I have him ranked at number 26 overall on my big board, so that's on all positions. But I don't necessarily think that he's the 26th most talented player in this class. I think he deserves to be higher. However, just the idea that he is a running back, and even though we talked about the skill sets, he's more than a running back, but he's labeled as a running back. He has the running back role, and that really hurts his value just because of that idea and that sort of way that you look at running backs these days. You think of Todd Gurley, where the Rams gave him a huge contract, and he was out there. He had all kinds of injury issues, and his play, it was declining a little bit, but I think a lot of that is to blame the injuries on. But still, you see that declining play level after these big second contracts. So bringing in a running back is something that that you just don't really like doing super early. Of course, there are always exceptions in the NFL draft. It seems like once every other year or so, you see one of these generational type labeled running backs. Think Saquon Barkley, think Ezekiel Elliott, Christian McCaffrey, Leonard Fournette maybe. But you see these guys that are drafted really, really high, and Etienne and Harris, they're amazing prospects, but it's just so hard to rank running backs higher. Like Etienne, Harris, they're plenty talented to be a first-round pick, like a lock first-round pick, but playing the running back position, it's very risky to take them early, and some teams are definitely more willing to take risks than others are, but Etienne, Harris, they're two guys that, as I mentioned, they're talented enough to be first-rounders, but playing running back, it certainly hurts their value, and also there's a lot of great running backs passed around the NFL, so taking a running back early on isn't a necessity for teams just because they know they can get a serviceable guy. James Robinson, he was undrafted last year. He was an amazing running back last season. And I know that's just sort of an example, but like there's these guys that sort of come out of nowhere. It seems like more at the running back position than anywhere else. Think Philip Lindsay a couple years ago, he was undrafted. So drafting running backs is just not super valuable. So there's technically 3 guys that I think could go in the first round. Really more like 2, but I feel like Javonte Williams has a slight chance. But they just don't have the same value that they had years ago. Running backs, their value decreasing. And I think that Jamar Jefferson is plenty talented to be 4th and maybe high 5th round pick. But he's going to probably slide into the 5th or 6th round just because he plays the running back position. And drafting guys, especially in those mid-rounds, it's just not really worth it because you know you can get a guy at that level or possibly higher fairly easily off the free agent market on a cheap contract. Of course, the rookies are on cheap contracts as well. But the running back position is really taking a hit. And this is a talented running back class, but they're in this generation, and it's probably going to keep going this way in the future. But they're in this generation where running backs are not really appreciated, and they're not valued super high. So this video is just sort of a talking point. I'm not really trying to come to an answer to anything, but this video more of just a discussion about the running backs and their role, their future in the NFL, and just where the running back position is with, of course, the contracts, the thing where teams are just scared to draft these guys, but also the changing games that I touched on earlier, with a lot of these guys having to do more than you would just see a typical running back doing years ago. So that is pretty much all I have for this video. Once again, just more of a discussion more than anything, really. But be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed. I really liked filming this video, and I hope you enjoyed. And let me know in the comments what you think about the running back position now in the NFL. Has it lost its value completely? The answer, I'd say no. You still see, especially these super talented guys, they are very well respected and well paid, but it's just not quite the same value and not quite the same appreciation that you would see not too long ago. But let me know what you think about the running back position in the comments. Subscribe to the channel if you're not already, and go subscribe to my live streaming channel and my Clemson channel if you're not already subscribed to either of those. They will each be linked in the description, as they always are. And I'll see you guys next time here on Sports Earth.